Thank you, Catherine, so much for that wonderful introduction. Thank you, Josh, for your leadership. Thank you, everybody, for being here in the fight for a better Utah and a better America. And I have to thank you, Catherine, for the introduction. I've had worse. President Clinton once introduced me. He said, "This is Michael. He's the person who types my speeches." That was accurate, but I thank you for that. It is true also that when you are working in a modern White House in a speechwriting operation, you work on a lot of speeches. And at my going away party, they gave me a gift which was a T-shirt, and they said it was the symbol of the speechwriting department, and it was the recycling symbol. So, lots of memories. It is great to be here with you. It's great to be here with my colleague John Donahue on behalf of the Brennan Center. We are fortunate to have had the chance to work with many of you here in the state in the fight for democracy. We are a nonpartisan law and policy institute that tries to reform and revitalize and, when necessary, defend the systems of democracy and justice in this country. Those systems badly need reform and revitalization. We're eager to stay in touch, and I will say that we have a sign-in sheet for news. We have these spam-free electronic newsletters full of footnoted content that we send out every week, and we're eager to share them with as many as possible. And it's just a wonderful thing to be in a vibrant room of people who are committed and passionate to the ideals that we all care about so much in a beautiful place. Just the few hours that we've seen of Salt Lake City has been really breathtaking. I came from New York, but unlike Donald Trump, who came from the East to take back these glorious monuments, we're all here to take back our democracy, and we're here to commit. When you look at what's going on, when you look at the past, the tumult and the tweets and the craziness, there's really something very profound and deep that we're all living through. We are, all of us, in the middle of a great struggle for the future of American democracy. It's nothing less. The values of the Constitution, the ethos of self-governance, of tolerance, of the rule of law are all on the line. They really are. The history of the country, which I had the chance to study in the writing of this book, it's not a straight line, as Josh said. There are setbacks and swerves at every step. But we as a nation should be endlessly proud of what we brought into the world in terms of the ideals which we didn't live up to at the beginning and we don't live up to now. When Thomas Jefferson wrote that preamble to the Declaration of Independence, they said that not just we're breaking with Great Britain, but that government is legitimate only if it rests on, quote, the consent of the governed. That was a really radical notion then and now. And they were hypocrites. They didn't live up to it. But the ideal was so powerful that we're all still struggling to live up to it to this day. James Madison, at that point, put out what I still think may be one of the best definitions of democracy that we've ever had in our country. In the Constitutional Convention, in the fight for the Constitution, he said, who are to be the electors in our new government? Not the rich more than the poor, not the learned more than the ignorant, not, Madison said, the haughty heirs of famous names rather than the humble sons of unpropitious fortune. The electors are to be the great body of the people of the United States. That's still what we're fighting for to this day. And we've fought for it over so many years in the struggles for expanded voting rights, for civil rights, for LGBT rights, for the environment, for all the things that generations of Americans before us fought for. And we know now that our democracy, the democracy we love, the democracy they fought to create and imagined, is stretched tight, is facing pressures of a kind it has not faced in years. Long before Donald Trump took that fateful escalator ride, that gilded escalator, down into the lobby of Trump Tower, to the audience of actors paid to applaud him. This is actually true. Long before that, we had the lowest voter turnout rate in this country in 72 years. We had pervasive gerrymandering. We had a money-drenched politics ushered in by Citizens United and other crackpot Supreme Court rulings. All before Donald Trump became president. We have to admit that the rise of Donald Trump and his nativism and bigotry is a symptom of the problems with our democracy, not the cause. And now, of course, as we know, he's doing everything he can to make it worse. Think about the last year. I understand you had your last breakfast a year ago when we were all reeling in very basic ways. Think about what's happened over the last year. And yes, it is really true that we are seeing a presidency that simply does not believe in the basic underlying norms of our constitutional governance. And we have not seen that in years. We've not had a president who did not mention the Constitution in his inaugural address, to give just one example. A president who put a white supremacist in the office next to the Oval Office, who uses the bully pulpit to bully. We haven't had that in a long, long time. But think also of what we also haven't had and what we've seen over the past year. We have never had a response, a resistance, arising like we have in this country right now in years and years. Think about it. We never had an inaugural like that. We never had 5 million people, 5 million women on the streets of the country the day after. We never had 8 courageous federal judges ruling to strike down the first action by the new administration, the ban on people from Muslim countries. And believe me, they would not have taken that strong step if they didn't see those people on the streets of our country. People watch and change their sense of what is possible when they see who's out protesting and speaking out and fighting out. And all through this year, think of the people at town halls, at airports, fighting the repeal of the Affordable Care Act, and in an extraordinary and unexpected and unprecedented thing, winning. This has not happened before in our country, and all of you and all of us should be proud of that. But we also know that there's a lot of fighting still to do. We should take the lesson that the debate is on, that we don't know what the outcome is going to be, and that we all have to together commit to continuing to stand up for the values we care about. Let's talk about some of the things that the Brennan Center works on with so many of you. All of us together should commit to defend that most sacred of American rights, the right to vote, which is under attack by this administration in a way it has not been in years. The Justice Department, led by Jeff Sessions, is literally switching sides in the voting rights cases all across the country. You have now a president who stood up and said, and he actually said this, I actually won the popular vote. If you subtract the 2 to 3 million illegal voters, I actually won. These were very special illegal voters. They were not only illegal, apparently, they were invisible. Nobody saw them. Not Fox News, not the RNC's lawyers, not the law enforcement people, nobody. They're invisible. Let's be very, very clear that the Brennan Center's research has showed that you are more likely to be struck by lightning than to commit in-person voter fraud in the United States. The idea of widespread voter fraud is a pernicious myth, and we need to say that it is not a charge, it is not an allegation, it is a lie. And then, he got a lot of pushback on that. To justify his hallucinatory tweet, the president created an investigative commission stacked with vote suppressors to try to prove the illegal, millions of invisible illegal voters being bussed all over the country. And as I think many of you know, the very first thing that the driving force in that commission did, a guy named Chris Kobach, who was the Secretary of State of Kansas, the very first thing they did was to send out a ham-fisted and highly illegal request to every state for the personal data on every voter, including Social Security numbers, the last 4 digits. We were very proud to leap into action with the League of Women Voters of Utah to sue, to stop the state of Utah from turning over that information, to stop other states from turning over that information. We're very hopeful in this state. We've won victories in other states, and there's something that folks might not realize. In the face of this pushback and in the face of the ridicule that this commission has received, it has basically imploded. It's imploded. One of the commissioners actually sued the other commissioners. That's what it's come to. And the response was, we weren't cutting you out of the loop. We're not actually doing anything. So, you know, finally a government official who's honest, right? So we have a great deal to be proud of in, we hope, stopping this assault on voting rights. And it may try to revive itself, but when and if it does, we will all be standing together to say, no way. There are many other things that we need to stand up and make our voices heard on the rule of law and on democracy. When the president, when the lawyer for the president of the United States says, as happened this week, in the face of mounting evidence of deep intertwining between the Trump campaign and a hostile foreign power in the Russian government, and when the president's lawyer says, oh no, a president cannot commit obstruction of justice, we need to say, just ask Richard Nixon if that's the case. Of course presidents can commit obstruction of justice. In fact, they've been impeached for doing it in the past. That's actually what happened. When we see the tax bill, when we see what is mischievously called tax reform, but which is in fact an unprecedented transfer of wealth from working people and the middle class and the poor to the very most fortunate and wealthiest among us. When we see that passing in the middle of the night, in the dead of the night, in part because we know there are several fundraisers the next day that they have to jet off to. And then Senator Hatch is asked about children's health care, the CHIP program, which he's so proud of having helped create. And he actually said, the reason CHIP is in trouble is we don't have money anymore. When he says that, we should all say, yes, we do, and we know where it went. And we're going to stand up for the values of a country and not just the values of the donor class that demands a tax cut that we cannot afford. So these are the fights we have to fight against. The lesson of the past year is that even when the odds are stacked against so many of these things, even when it looks as if there's changes in the country and changes in our electorate and changes in the governmental system that make it hard to recognize for so many of us, we can actually win big fights. We can take that power, that energy, the upsurge of involvement from young people, from women, from people all over the country, and use that to win unexpected policy victories. But I will say, and this is one of the reasons it's exciting to be here with all of you right now in Utah, resistance is important, resistance is vital, but resistance is not enough. What matters is not what we are against, but what we are for. What do we want to show that we would build as a vision of our country that would embody our values, not the way the country used to be, but the way it is now and going forward? And there, in fact, are exciting developments, positive movement toward meaningful reforms in the state of our democracy happening all over the country. We need to all together work to build momentum on that. On the right to vote, on voting. The greatest single positive change that could happen is to move to automatic voter registration. Every single eligible person who is eligible to vote should be able to vote, period. And this has now become the law in 11 states, bipartisan. I know there's a real discussion of doing it here in Utah. We are thrilled to work with folks on the ground to make that happen. It would send a very powerful positive signal. This all together around the country would add tens of millions of people to the voting rolls. It would cost less, and it would bolster security. And even in the middle of the partisanship and the polarization, it is happening all across the country. On money in politics, we need to stand together and say, Citizens United is bad law, and we're going to see it overturned. We're going to move to revitalize the public financing system for campaigns all over the country, and so many other steps to tap public anger about what has happened to our politics, the money-drenched negativity that manages to turn our democracy into something unrecognizable. We all can say together, let's do something about the Electoral College, which turns every election into something where our votes don't count. In a state like Utah or in a state like New York, almost anywhere except for a few counties in Ohio or Florida that get deluged with campaigning. These are things that can make a big, big difference. But the most important, the most fundamental, and in many ways the most encouraging issue right now in reforming and revitalizing and rebuilding our democracy is this issue of gerrymandering, where you all have a real chance to make an extraordinary difference in the coming year. Now, as you know, gerrymandering is the drawing of these district lines to benefit a political party, or maybe both political parties scratching each other's backs, or a racial majority. And we all have to admit that gerrymandering isn't a brand new thing. It's been around from the beginning of the country. People don't realize the very first congressional election, right after the Constitution was ratified, Patrick Henry drew a gerrymandered district to try to keep James Madison from being elected to Congress because Henry was against the Constitution. So it's not a new thing, but and both parties, as we know, have done it over the years, whenever they could. But it has grown worse and worse and more dangerous and more dangerous. A key factor, as you know, is new technology. It used to be an art, and now it is a science. And with data analytics and computers, people who want to draw these lines can etch them with microscopic precision to make sure that the voice of voters is not heard, and that no matter what the electorate wants to do, they really can't turn out the party that's in power. This is happening here, it's happening all over the country. It's happening in many states in a more egregious way than ever before. But this is generating a response that has come from people from across the philosophical divide, from both sides of the aisle. You see, first of all, a real possibility for a victory in the United States Supreme Court to declare that the most extreme, the most egregious partisan gerrymandering is not just wrong, is not just bad for democracy, it is flat out unconstitutional. A federal court ruled that the map in the state of Wisconsin was so bad that it violated the Constitution. They heard the arguments in October. We expect a ruling within the next few months. And there was an extraordinary outpouring, which the Brennan Center was part of helping to coordinate. A friend of the court briefs from political leaders from both parties, Arnold Schwarzenegger, John McCain, and John Kasich, and the head of the Freedom Caucus, all filed briefs urging the court to strike down Scott Walker's gerrymander of Wisconsin. All the historians, all the political scientists, all the experts saying, it isn't your eyes, it isn't your imagination, it really is getting worse, and if we don't do something about it now, we're never going to be able to. We're going to have a self-perpetuating incumbency entrenchment machine. We have to act now. So it's going to be exciting if the Supreme Court makes this ruling. It will be the first time in the country's history that that happens. But that ruling will likely, even if it's a good one, be very narrow. It will not, in fact, solve the problems in most places in the country. And that's why the other thing that is happening is even more exciting, is even more democratic, is even more indicative of people, of citizens taking the problem and taking matters into their own hands. There is a nationwide wave of reform to try to address gerrymandering, just like you all are discussing here in Utah, in California, in Arizona, in Ohio, in Florida. Really significant citizen referendum, ballot initiatives created redistricting commissions or other redistricting reform. You now have 11 states with redistricting commissions, and you now have a chance here in Utah, as Catherine described, through the Better Ballots Initiative, to take a step that would bring this kind of balance and democracy and transparency to the system here. We've been fortunate to work with the folks drafting this. It draws on many of the lessons of what's worked in other states, and it would be an extraordinary victory, not only in Utah, but it would send a signal to the whole country that this is not for one region, it's not for one party. This is what people care about in our democracy. And when everybody is in their most cynical mood, and they say, oh, these democracy issues, the state of our democracy, the health of our governing institutions, that's kind of boring. That's not a kitchen table issue. The political consultants will tell the politicians that people don't sit around at their kitchen table and talk about this. I hope that we can say to them, nonsense. Look at how people are on the streets all over the country. Look at how people are on the streets and putting, right now, not just in Utah, but in Michigan, people putting hundreds of thousands of signatures to get a ballot measure to do a reform referendum there from both parties. This is something not the politicians, maybe not the pundits, maybe not the media, but the citizens care about a lot. And I encourage you and I congratulate you, and I look forward to hearing about what happens next. And as you do this work, and as you fight on all the issues on which you're fighting, as you look into the face of steep odds and challenges and setbacks and things as depressing as what happened here yesterday, remember that this fight is the same fight we've been privileged to wage from the country's beginning. It was the fight that brought people out to take on a oppressive colonial power at Lexington and Concord. It was the fight that led people to courageously form the Underground Railroad, and for Frederick Douglass and the other abolitionists to say, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has. It never will. It's the same fight that led hundreds of thousands of women in a movement that we don't learn about enough in school. Not to be given the right to vote, but to demand the right to vote and to win it in a fierce, hotly contested, and glorious victory for voting rights in the 19th Amendment. It's the fight that the LGBT movement, that the environmental movement, that all kinds of efforts through many, many years have waged. That's not just the fight for anybody's self-interest. It's not just the fight for all of our self-interest together. It's the fight for those ideals, for the values that were set out at the country's beginning that we struggle even now to live up to. So again, let's take heart in the chance that we all have to make big progress, big, unexpected leaps forward in that struggle, in the fight for a better Utah, in the fight for a better America, and in the fight to put democracy back at the heart of our politics, which is where it belongs. Thank you for being here.